From the world headquarters of Fox News, it's The Kelly File with Megyn Kelly.
Well, new developments tonight in the case against those 6 Baltimore police officers charged in the arrest and death of Freddie Gray. They are now facing charges of murder, manslaughter, assault, and false imprisonment, and now we're learning about their likely defense. Arthur Aidala is a New York trial attorney and a Fox News legal analyst. He's got the details. So the New York Times doing a lengthy piece today talking about where this case is going. What do you think is the headline?
Well, there's a couple of a couple of headlines. The biggest thing was when she charged one person with murder in the second degree.
The driver of the van.
The driver. That's usually a strategy by the prosecutor to put so much pressure on that individual to get them to flip. This is a case where there's not a lot of evidence. There's not a lot of eyewitness evidence. So if you put so much pressure on one defendant, you get him to come forward and say, okay, I'll tell you what really happened. Just give me reduced charges. Because they're filing motions jointly, it does not appear that that's the case at this point.
So you think the Baltimore Six, as they're known, are sticking together? They're not dividing? At this very early point in the investigation, in the legal proceedings, yes. And let's talk about the other thing is that the Times cites a person familiar with the investigation saying there was no indication, according to the autopsy, that Freddie Gray had been beaten or otherwise mistreated. So it's all going to come down to what happened inside that van or what was wrong with him prior, on his own. But they're not going to be able to prove, according to the autopsy, that the cops mishandled him. Correct. And before he got in. From the prosecutor's statements, it seems like her theory of the case is that they took him for what we would call a rough ride. Yep. They didn't harness him in, and then they drove like maniacs, knowing that it could cause that type of injury. And there's a whole issue that came out now about, there's two things: the knife that was seized from him and the legality or illegality of it. So whether he should have been in custody to begin with. And what's the new thing that came out in this evidence here is that she's saying that the knife was fine. It was nothing wrong with it. However, it's described as a spring-assisted, one-hand operated knife. That's what it's described as. Yeah, it's illegal under Baltimore law, but it's legal under Maryland law, is what the defense attorneys are arguing. So that's if that knife was illegal, then several of these officers the false imprisonment charges are going to get thrown out. People can't believe there even are false imprisonment charges, especially since a new ruling by the Supreme Court in Maryland says if a police officer makes a reasonable mistake. So if it's a close call, is it a legal knife or not an illegal knife, but they still make the arrest, these charges will definitely get thrown out. That's the thing that's shocking to me, that she completely ignored that court ruling that specifically comes out and says you don't charge cops for a mistake. And of course that's the law. Otherwise no cop could do his job. Here's the other thing I want to get to, though. The rules on seat belts. Yes. Because that's at the crux of her entire case, that they put Freddie Gray in on his stomach in that police car, shackled and handcuffed, and didn't buckle him in, and that was reckless. And yet the rules on buckling in a detainee just changed. Correct. Just changed. Like that week. 9 days prior. Right. The week right before. 9 days before. To that arrest. And it was on page 15 of some memo that was given to them. The whole issue is, did the cops know? Was there a roll call where their sergeant came in that 9 days before or any time after and said, by the way, there's no procedures, etc. There are new procedures, and they ignored them? And no longer is it just, it used to be you're recommended to belt somebody in, and then it changed to you must. Just 9 days earlier, that change had been made. And the same thing in that same packet had to do with rendering aid. It used to be when it was reasonable, and it changed to upon request. So it used to be it was the police officer's judgment to render aid, and 9 days prior, it changed to all the inmate has to do is say, I need medical help, and then they have to do it. She's going to have a tough time. But look, I got to go, but I want to ask you a quick question. They think her case comes down to statements these guys may have made to her prior to her charging these cops. Do those statements come into evidence? There will be a huge, that will be the crux of this case. There will be huge hearings with the police officers saying, absolutely not. We gave those statements in our capacity of police officers, not in our capacities as criminal defendants who were not read their rights. That will be the crux of this case. That is really interesting, and it's going to a grand jury now to see whether her charges can actually go forward. I don't believe that murder two. There's no evidence there for that murder two count. Great to see you. Thank you. Well, after an NFL investigation suggested that Tom Brady may have cheated in the run-up to the Super Bowl, he's pushing back tonight, and Brian Kilmeade is pushing back on him. Plus, I put one question to Governor Jeb Bush about the war in Iraq, and it became the political story for an entire week. Up next, a soldier who did tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan has a message for the media. Knowing what we know now, would you have authorized the invasion?
I would have, and so would have Hillary Clinton, just to remind everybody, and so would have almost everybody that was confronted with the intelligence they got.